Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning, students. Welcome to another lecture of political leadership and communication. This is probably your sixth lecture now, and we've already discussed about, communication, what is political communication, how did it evolve over the period of time. When we talk about, the media, the channel through which the political communication mostly happens. So we talked about how we basically evolved from the period of propagandas to newspapers to television, and then we have the new digitalization phase and the AI phase. We also talked about, if you remember, the different skills, the leadership skills particularly, which one should imbibe in order to improve their leadership qualities. Having said that, we also did about talked in regard with your leadership theories, the styles of leadership, okay, and how the different styles of leadership basically in different circumstances would be beneficial. There is not one single holistic leadership quality which particularly is present in whatever leaders you want to take as examples. It's basically a culmination of different styles, and when we were talking about leadership skills, it is very important that rather than learning about it, it is it would be beneficial if we actually try to imbibe that in our day-to-day lives, because as I told you, leadership does not only mean that you are the PM of any country, or you are basically leading any particular organization. It is basically, it could be leadership as very simple in organizing an event of a college, or, and, being a class representative of your class. Okay, so all these things are, require certain kind of skills. One of them were leadership skills. Now, today's class will be about communicative skills. Okay, how do you improve your communication? Mostly we'll be, referring to examples from the political side. Why? Because we're talking about improving your political communication as well. Okay, now when I talk about communication and political communication, the very basic difference is that there are various factors which play a very important role in political communication, whereas communication can be as simple as talking to your neighbor or your friend. But when we are basically talking about political communication, there are different factors. Like in the previous class, we also learned about how agenda setting and media framing has come into picture, where your ideas, the way they are presented, what you should think about, how you should think about, and what is an important agenda is basically all determined. So the communication which is happening these days is basically not something which is just coming out of an ideal curiosity, but it is a very planned way of putting in front the communication process. So if you remember, in the previous classes we were doing that, how this communication happens through research, which is basically how any particular issue or an event, how it is presented, how different frames are being presented, how media presents it in, say, a political frame, a socio-cultural frame, or an economics frame. Okay, so we did all that in order to analyze that whatever communication is happening, whether it is between the political leaders and the audience, or whether it is between the audience itself through networks, or for that matter, if it is between the media and the civil society, how does particularly this communication has changed to an extent that it has not become a free communication, but a controlled message style of communication. Okay. So now today's class would be, defining all these skills. How do you improve yourself in order to particularly ensure certain kind of credibility, ensure certain kind of responsibility, how you basically build a certain kind of trust among your group members, or for that matter, people who are around you. Now this communication, what we are going to study today, is mostly related with political communication, which is basically we are going to use examples of political leaders, and also we are going to see how this particular communication can be improved over the period of time. Okay, so let's just start with the political communication skills and why it is important, or what are these skills which we are going to study today. Okay. So, communication skills basically entail that, it is understand your audience, which basically means that, if you are going to give a speech, or if you're even going to do a research in some particular area where you need to interact with people, or if you're a research scholar and you're probably trying to, find out that what is the basic demands of the people in that area, or why do these particular voters are voting for a particular political party. So that is why when we talk about these enhancements of political communication skills, we are basically involving a lot of factors here. We are involving political leadership, we are involving public policy, we are involving public opinion, and we are basically trying to persuade or understand how and why do people vote for a political party, or how do these ideas which people have over the period of time has changed, or what is the agenda in which they are basically trying to evaluate your political leaders or your representatives. Okay, having said that, we basically also see that this political communication is not just about political leaders, but any particular in an organization where you are trying to be a leader and communicate to your group. It is basically important that you imbibe certain kind of communication skills. Now, the first one, as I said, that understand your audience. Okay, who is your audience? Now, if I say that, you're going in a, say, urban school, okay, which is in a city. Now, if you go and say that school is convent school, okay, and you have to particularly educate them about, the recent change in the course curriculum, okay, or what the at the central level, how the schooling system is going to change, okay. Now, if you go in a convent school in an urban city, then it is important that you should probably know English. Okay, or you should know how to communicate with those students in English, because since it's a convent school, it is basically a mindset that the most of these students would exactly be okay in English as a medium of communication. But if you go in, say, a village school, or if you go in Kendriya Vidyalayas in the village, then you will see that most of the students would be comfortable in their local language, or Hindi if that is. So then it is important that you should know your audience, that who is your audience, whether your audience are school kids, whether your audience are working class, whether your audience are retired people, or particularly your audience is the working class. Okay. Now, if occupation is particularly your motive, then you should realize that in which particular section, what audience you are going to address. So, it is said that know your audience. Also that, whenever you are trying to even observe any political behavior of people, or voter behavior for that matter, it is important that you should keep certain things in mind when you're going in, say, sensitive areas where you have minorities there, or you're going in areas where you have scheduled tribes, okay, or scheduled caste people living there. So, you should have a certain kind of sense of, information about that particular area. So, that is, it is said that, you should know your audience, whether it is homogeneous, whether it is heterogeneous, okay. The second is master the art of persuasion, okay. Now, this is very, very important, and we also discussed this during your leadership skills, that how ethos, pathos and logos are being used. Now, ethos is basically the credibility of a person. So, you should over the period of time establish yourself as a credible leader or a credible person whom people can trust, who has a good track record, so that your credibility is what will make people trust you. Okay, so unless and until you don't have that credibility, people would not even listen to you. So that is why ethos is very important. Pathos is basically your emotional side, or how you basically emotionally connect with the audience, okay, because we all know that sometimes the logic and the facts do not work. It is basically the emotional connect which people have, okay. Generally, if you saw that there was an emotional connect with Rajiv Gandhi. Why? And he was immediately chosen as the Prime Minister, and he won also the elections, because it was, people had sympathy towards the Gandhi family because Indira Gandhi was shot dead, and that is why it was believed that, her son should basically be come to the seat, and people, not just out of, that he will be a good leader, but it was mostly because, people were associated with him on the basis of emotions. Okay, the next is your logos. Now logos is basically on the basis of facts and data particularly. Now if you have to use data, it should be basically used to tell the effect of any particular policy. For that matter, how did Jan Dhan Yojana do in particularly, or what effect it had with the audience, how it benefited the audience, or for that matter, how did the policy of Ayushman Bharat, benefited the people, or which section of the people benefited the most. So in these circumstances, if you're basically giving an informative knowledge to your audience, then it is important that you use certain kind of data, or it should be based on fact, like for example that during COVID-19 how many deaths happen, what is the success rate, how many people are recovering, and if there is credibility in it, going back to the first point particularly, that you should have certain kind of credibility, the particularly your ethos. Okay, that the person should have credibility, because then only people will accept the truth if it's coming from a person's speech. For example, if I say WHO has issued an advisory, now you would definitely be willing to listen to WHO rather than willing to listen to any WhatsApp message or on Facebook message, because WHO has certain kind of credibility when it comes to health advisory. Okay, so these are the basically certain kind of emotions which you should master, which is also called the art of persuasion. The third is enhanced public speaking. Okay, now we have all seen that on public forum, sometimes it happens that whenever a political leader comes to give speech, people generally make fun of him or her if they are not able to give speech without reading a paper, or for that matter they basically pronounce words differently. Now this should not happen. Why? Because once you are basically a political leader, or for that matter even if your principal is giving a speech in the school, then also you should know that public speaking is very, very important. And when I mention public speaking, it is not about just the verbal communication, it also depends upon the attitude which you are giving your speech with, the kind of words you are using, also the kind of body language which you are portraying. So public speaking is you can say a skill which you should enhance by taking skills like impromptu speaking. Like somebody has asked you to say a 5-minute speech on a particular topic, so you should be immediately ready with certain kind of ideas of how you will basically go about it or present it. Now this can be only done once you imbibe these skills on your own. Okay, this cannot be taught by somebody, but it is basically a skill which you can only enhance within you by implicating it in your day-to-day lives. Okay, the third is be clear, concise and structured. Okay, that means your message should be very, very clear. As we discussed in the first class, if you remember, that there was a kind of a process through which communication used to happen, which was basically there was a person, okay, there's a sender, then there's an encoder, okay, then there's a message, there is a channel, there's a decoder, and then at the end there's a receiver. So again, till the time the message which is in your head that is not basically formulated, or it's not encoded in a form of a message or a written testimony or a verbal testimony, it has no value. Okay, so that is why when we say that the message is being encoded, it should be encoded in such a manner that whatever the speaker would like the other party to hear or see or particularly perceive should be very clear. Okay, that today is the day of voting, go and vote. Now this is particularly a slogan where you can say that, okay, today is the voting day and I will have to go and vote. Now there is a clear indication that today is the day. Okay, for example, if this slogan was basically given in another manner, that now it is the time to vote. Okay, Now is the time to vote. It could be any particular day, but if you want to basically remind people exactly when is the day of voting, you would mention the date and the time of when you have to go and vote. So the message should be very clear, it should be very concise, in order that it is not perceived very differently by the receiver. Okay, the next is develop emotional intelligence. Now this is basically your emotional intelligence is also one of the very important leadership skills what we did, that how emotionally particularly you can overcome all your emotions, whether it is fear, whether it is happiness or sadness, whether it's anxiety, or whether it is anger. All these particular emotions are a part of your emotional intelligence. Okay, so it is important as a particularly leader, or for that matter if you are a part of any organization, that you should try to overcome your emotions or have a control on them, as well as you should know when to use which emotion in order to get the job done or the work output. Okay, sometimes you require a very firm language, or probably you require a firm attitude to get things done, because it's task oriented and there is a shortage of time. But when it happens that you have an event which you have to organize, you have a time limit to that, it's, for example, you have to do it in a month, then probably you can have an interactive session with your team, you can have a kind of an informal communication with your team, and you can use some kind of emotional side to it also, and get to know your team members. Now because you have time in hand, you can do all these things. Okay, but when particularly it's you have limited time and it's task oriented, then you have to have certain kind of firmness in your communication. Okay, so emotional intelligence is something which you should know when to use and how to use. Okay, the next is master digital and social media communication. Now we live in a digitalized world, we all know, and there are basically new forms of communication which are coming up. We have already seen when we were doing about evolution of political communication, we saw that how AI has been used in contemporary times in order to basically view leaders in such a way, or particularly enhance their speaking skills, in terms of how closed messaging has come up in a closed environment. The politicians can directly now reach people through emails and SMSs. Earlier, how journalists used to do that for the politicians, and we saw that certain kind of persuasion had been done at that time. Now in contemporary times, if you have closed messaging, if you have agenda setting, if you have media framing coming up, you have particularly PR agents working just the way they work in any particular business model. Now this business model has shifted to the political sphere here, and that is why we see that how this digitalization has basically worked in favor of all these politicians, how they have used particularly this digital world in order to reach the voter, in order to persuade the the voting behavior of people, and how do these behavioral qualities can basically be used in terms of manipulation also. We've seen that whether it is done by politicians, whether it is done by normal civil society through media, or whether it is done by the media themselves. So over the period of time, we've seen that how digitalization has basically used certain components, whether it's algorithms or whether it is agenda setting, how they use basically to influence the public in contemporary times. Okay, the next is focus on non-verbal communication. Now whenever we talk about communication, the first thing which comes into our mind is that it is a verbal communication. I am basically saying something, or there is a speech going on, or on a public platform or something like this. So now what we basically talk about communication is not just about writing, speaking or hearing. It is also about non-verbal, where you use sign language, or where you use symbols, or where you use basically certain kind of gestures to basically promote that it's a basic form of communication. For example, generally whenever any mishap, any natural calamity happens, or if there's a terrorist attack, okay, it is said that everybody will probably switch off their lights, say from 7 to 8 o'clock at night. Now this is basically a gesture of showing certain kind of solidarity, okay. Even though a particular leader sitting in one part of the country can basically associate with the major population through media and through a sign or a symbol where everybody has to switch off their electricity, can basically work towards showing the solidarity of the country. So this is basically, you will get to know, or the these media or the journalists would get to know, or people around the world would also get to know, that India particularly has solidarity, and they have all shown solidarity in terms of fighting or combating, say, terrorism, okay. Now recently we have also seen that when in Kashmir there was an attack done in Pahalgam, we saw that the people particularly came on roads. There was Bharat Bandh on a certain day, and that is why we say that there is a certain kind of unity and solidarity existing. So this is a pure form of non-verbal communication. Similarly, if I have to give you another example of non-verbal communication, it could be as simple as that there is a child who is unwell in your college, and for there is a praying session arranged for that particular child, okay. Now all the college students, teachers come together and pray for that child. So that is again a non-verbal form of a communication, showing certain kind of empathy and sympathy towards the child who is basically ill, okay. So this is all a certain kind of non-verbal communication. You need not verbally communicate, but that you can use different kinds of symbol or language, or I can say signs particularly, in order to communicate certain kind of messaging, okay. The next is building trust through consistency and integrity, okay. Now again this goes back that if as a leader of any organization, or as a political leader as well, if you are able to basically gain trust of people through your consistency of saying developing the country, okay. If you can develop the country and people can see particularly that there is some kind of development happening here, then people would probably start to build trust in you, okay. Now if I have to give an example, we can give an example of Nitin Gadkari. Whenever he basically says that this is a project we have been entailed in the national highways across India, and the timeline of this project is probably, say, end of this year, he generally tends to fulfill that, okay. Now that is ensuring credibility, that one, you are able to complete your work in time, and whatever you have said or particularly imparted it to the people, you have basically gained that trust by gaining this kind of credibility through your work, okay. So even if a normal person might not know who Nitin Gadkari is, but because the media channels tends to show him that yes, he has basically built so many highways in time, and whenever he says it, he promises, the promises are being fulfilled. So then you tend to develop a certain kind of trust in that person, and that happens only through the credibility, okay. The third is practice ethical communication, avoid misinformation, respect opposing views, and promote truth and transparency, okay. Now you must have seen that in parliaments, we know that people tend to throw chairs or disrupt the parliament, okay. Now if particularly you do not hear the opposing party, or you do not hear the views, you would probably not know what has gone in your own public policy, okay. So that is why when we talk about communication, it is not just about imparting the information about something, but it is also about receiving a certain kind of feedback from the opposing party, as well as when we see that in terms of misinformation, okay. That sometimes what happens is that through our WhatsApp channels or Facebook or Instagram, we see that a lot of fake news is being circulated. Okay, now this misinformation or these fake news tend to generally persuade people in a wrong direction. So it is very important that all these leaders who have that credibility or who have that authority and responsibility should basically try to impart information in a very clear and consistent manner in order to avoid any kind of misinformation that can basically be circulated in the society. Okay, so these are now the skills called the communicative skills. We are going to discuss more communicative skills in detail, but these are particularly skills I just gave you just about these skills in order for you to understand how you can improve your communication process. And it's not just about political leaders, it's basically about anybody who would in future organize any kind of event or be a part of any organization or a business model as well. Okay, so let's just begin with the first skill, which was audience centered communication. This I have explained, so let's just read this. Understanding the audience is a foundational principle in political communications. Leaders must recognize that constituents are not a monolithic group. They are segmented by age, class, education, political ideology, culture, and media consumption habits. Okay. Effective communication begins with the audience analysis, allowing the leaders to tailor their messaging in a way that is accessible, relevant, and resonant. Okay, so as I told you that you should know your audience, you should know whom you are speaking to, whether you are speaking in terms of age, like in a school or a college, or whether you are basically addressing any particular organization, say you are addressing team members of Tata Group, okay, or whether it's a political leader who is basically have a heterogeneous population if he or she is addressing that. Now, all these particular instances, you might have a homogeneous population, you might have different age groups, or you might have culturally different people. Now, you should know how to address. You have often seen leaders, if they are going in Calcutta, they start speaking in Bengali. Why? Because most of the people speak Bengali, and that is why, they can associate with that particular leader. For that matter, if they try to go to Gujarat, okay, so they will particularly speak in Gujarati. So, the language in India particularly is also very important in order to understand, your leader, whether your leader knows it or not, or whether your leader will be able to, establish a certain kind of communication or a relationship through language itself, okay. So, this includes inclusion of language, avoiding technical jargons, and adapting to the tone of to suit the cultural and emotional expectations of the audience. Okay, so let's just take an example that a politician has to address the youth of today, and the tonality of the speech should be such that it connects the youth through the usage of social media or cultural references. Okay, now if it is the youth you are addressing to, you must have seen that whenever Narendra Modi also comes and he wants to say something to the youth before their board exams, so he basically tries to talk to them in a very simplest manner and say things which are very relevant to particularly that age group, okay, or they particularly, even if they have to change their minds particularly, they use certain kind of digitalization to do that, okay. Why? Because youth can connect to the digital media or certain kind of you can say media in terms of how and what to use, whether it is through your PowerPoints or whether it is through the reels, okay, or the podcast. Now, you've generally seen that in contemporary times, this is basically has much more influencing power than just giving speeches, okay. Let's just take another example, which could be if the target audience is diverse, which is it is a heterogeneous audience, and the aim of the speaker is to impart information about a new scheme, then the speech should be as simple as possible without any jargons in order to avoid any misinformation, okay. So, if particularly any leader is coming and talking about, say, what is GST, okay, or implying GST, you have finance particularly minister talking about how GST will be applied. Now, if the person does not exactly explain in a very simplest manner about what is GST, how you will have to file. Particularly, how you will understand is very different. Why? Because one, it is a new scheme. Secondly, it will be difficult for you to basically implement because it's the first time that the scheme has been used. So, it is the duty of the leader to communicate to the members in a way that particularly it is easy and simple for them to basically imbibe it. Okay. The next is message clarity and consistency. So, one of the most critical aspects of political leadership and communication is the ability to convey clear and consistent messages. Okay. Political messages must easily be understood, it should be repeatable and free from any kind of contradiction. Okay. The message discipline ensures that the leaders and their teams stay aligned in their communication efforts, while consistent framing helps reinforce policy goals and public expectations. Okay. Now, this is basically how your message should be very clear and consistent. When I talk about consistent, it basically means that simplifying any complex policy matters into digestible formats without distorting their meaning. Okay. So, this involves a strategic use of metaphors, analogies and summary narratives to promote a better understanding. Okay. Let's just take an example to understand what is message clarity and consistency. It is basically, for example, a university introduces a new online assignment submission. Okay. One, that the assignment will be online now, it would not be in a hard copy form to the professors or your teachers. So, in order to ensure it is followed correctly, what does administration do? It basically communicates the message in a clear and consistent manner. Okay. For example, there is a clarity on time and the due date. Okay. And it states that all assignments must be submitted via LMS portal. Now, the name of the portal is also there and the time which is mentioned is 11:59 p.m. Okay, on the due date. Say due date is 30th May. Okay. Now, if this date is mentioned, if the time is mentioned, if the portal is mentioned, particularly there are highly less chances that anything can go wrong with this particular message, and all students would now know that their assignment has to be submitted online rather than offline. Okay. So, email submissions will not be accepted, which basically means that if you email them after 11:59, they will not be accepted. Okay. Now, the same instructions are shared by professors on course syllabus via official emails to students and on website. Okay. Now, here one, the message was clear, and secondly there was consistency. When we talk about consistency, in this case it was sent through all the channels, whether it was professors who had to be informed about it, whether it was students through their own email IDs, whether it was basically through on the university portal. Everywhere it was basically mentioned the due date, it was mentioned on which portal, it was mentioned by which time you have to basically send. So, there was clear message and there was consistency, that it was repeatedly being told to you, through various channels. Okay. Another very important skill is strategic framing and political storytelling. Okay. Now, what is strategic framing? It is basically similarly to your agenda framing only, which refers to the way in which political leaders define problems, attribute causes and propose solutions. Okay. Now, if I have to give an example, let's just say that there is a problem of refugee in India. Okay. Now, if it has to be represented, it could be represented in different frames. Okay. For example, it could be presented in the form of a security issue. Okay. Now, security is an issue that since there are so many refugees, there are high chances that the law and order can go haywire. Okay. So, then the issue is of security here. Okay. If we say about certain kind of human rights, okay, from the perspective of human rights, these refugees should be given asylum anywhere in the country, because it is the duty, it's a human right that these people should have shelter, should have food, should have water. Okay. And the third, particularly the framing can also be done that these particularly refugees have in terms of political issue, they will become the vote bank, okay, in future. So, then the political parties particularly would try to influence these voters or try to incorporate these refugees in the population and make them citizens for their own vote bank. Okay. So there are basically 3 frames which has come up, and that is why any particular agenda, how it is presented is very, very important. The strategic framing of it, okay. According to the scholars like George Lakoff, how issues are framed significantly influences the public interpretation and policy preferences, okay. For example, framing immigration as an economic asset versus security threat activates different cognitive and emotional responses, okay. Now, as I gave you an example of refugee problem, immigration is also there. For example, if I have to take US, recently the Trump has come into limelight and saying that immigration policies will be changed, no people will be allowed to stay here illegally, I will probably deport lot of people. Now, this is an immigration issue, okay. Now, how particularly the political leader Trump has framed it? He has basically framed it in terms of one, that because of this illegal immigration, there is unemployment, okay. Because of this illegal immigration, there is certain kind of security threat. So now what he has done, he has basically, this policy has been made to be presented in front of the people in such a manner that it has led to certain kind of emotional support. So why do you think people voted for Trump? Probably people voted for Trump because they felt that yes, immigration is an issue, it's a security threat, and also we are not getting jobs because of this illegal immigration, okay. Now, people staying there would definitely support it because this particular agenda was presented in such a manner. Had this agenda been presented in such a manner that, oh, let's see that these illegal immigrants are, living a very undignified life, or living in poor conditions or not healthy conditions, then it would have, arose the emotional side of people that, these people need certain kind of help. So it depends on how you are basically portraying any particular issue, okay. Similarly, storytelling is a powerful communicative device that helps humanize policies and embedded political values into relatable experiences, okay. Effective political stories reflect shared values, cultural narratives and moral lessons, okay. So in order to understand how the storytelling, operates, let's take an example of Narendra Modi's 2014 election campaign, okay, where he framed his life story as a central narrative to connect with the voters and legitimize his political vision, okay. Now, what happened in 2014 is Narendra Modi's campaign used chai wala to PM narrative, okay. Now, this is basically a very emotional side of storytelling, that even a chai wala who was just selling tea on the road or newspapers on the road was basically able to even become a PM of this country. So anybody can if they want to, okay, or if they will to. So that is the narrative which basically the campaign of 2014 used in order to gain an emotional appeal from the people. Similarly, why we have an emotional appeal to APJ Abdul Kalam, okay, why? Because he was also he used to sell newspapers on red lights, okay. So that is why we were able to, emotionally connect with the president, though we do not know him, okay. Similarly, if we say we talk about Ratan Tata, okay, why so many people were on the streets on the day he died? Because people, even though do not know him, but used to connect with him because he was a very humble person. He helped the country so many times, whether it was Mumbai attacks of 26/11, whether it was basically during COVID times. You saw that how Ratan Tata was basically being very humble and always ready to help the people of the country, okay. So that is exactly what influenced people or brought closer to him. Similarly, this campaign of Narendra Modi in 2017, which used the narrative of Chai Wala to PM, was basically a kind of a way, a narrative, a story to tell or connect to the voters, okay. Modi consistently presented himself as a self-made man who rose from humble beginnings, okay. As I told you, it's basically a story of how a chai wala has basically over the period of time worked hard and reached to this position. So it's a self-made man story, okay, like a tea seller at a railway station to become a national leader, okay. And the core elements of this campaigning were like Modi was represented as a hero of ordinary Indian people with extraordinary determination, okay. So one, he is a self-made man. Secondly, he was, being presented as an extraordinary man of determination. He was basically, he is a story in terms of the poverty, marginalization and political opposition, how his struggle was basically told to people. So it was basically storytelling, and through this storytelling they were able to associate or connect with the people itself. Okay, the values here were basically hard work, discipline, nationalism and self-reliance. The moral is basically, if an ordinary citizen can become a PM, then the Indian too can rise through the strength and self-belief. Okay, so basically how this storytelling was being used in 2014 campaign was, one, a chai wala becoming a PM, his story of, how poor he was, how poverty basically led him to fight for it and then became the PM, and eventually the moral of the story, what they were trying to basically impart to the audience, that if a particularly chaiwala can become a PM, then of course India can fight all its obstacles and become great again as it used to be. Like it is said that India was a golden eagle. Okay, so then these narratives are basically being used in order to revive again, or in order to bring a kind of a change through Narendra Modi as the leader in 2014 election. Okay. Now, what was the political impact of this? So, this narrative basically helped him to connect to millions of aspiration Indians, especially from lower and middle income backgrounds. It created the leader of people image, that he is a people's person, and his kind of campaign, and Achhe Din Aane Wale Hain, was basically a sign that if you elect him, then there will be the good days who are going to be coming. Okay, the reinforcement of a future which is very hopeful, which is very bright, through the narrative of Narendra Modi as being the PM. Okay, another impact was through media. Okay, this story was echoed across mass rallies and social media campaigns and advertisement, allowing voters to emotionally invest in his journey. Modi also used platforms like Man Ki Baat to sustain his personal narrative through his tenure. Okay, so we've seen that on the radio channels he was also able to connect to the people through storytelling only. Okay, so that is why when we talk about Narendra Modi's campaign of 2014, it is basically compared with Obama's campaign of 2008 with his slogan that yes we can. Okay, yes we can was basically used by Obama's campaigning in 2008 in order to ensure that yes we can make America great again. Okay, we can do it together. Okay, and similarly, just the way in India where you saw a chai wala becoming a PM, there also it was for the first time that a African American particularly became the president, even though there was so much discrimination in particularly USA. So, we generally compare these kind of events and how campaigning of these events led to a drastic change. So, how storytelling could have an impact where you basically from a very nominal person to become the leader of the country is how communication, how impactful actually the communication is. Okay. The next is dialogue and participatory communication. Now, this is basically nothing but how you use your dialogue in not just to basically have one way or one dimensional communication that only there's one leader who is speaking, but a two-way communication where you basically involve the other members or your voters in particularly your own political campaign or your own government in order to improve certain kind of policies or in order to improve certain kind of your management. Okay, you take inputs from your group members or team members. Okay, so very good example of this would be Aam Aadmi's manifesto which came during Delhi elections. Now this was basically done in the initial phases. Okay, AAP had a participatory manifesto development during elections, Delhi elections. This is not this time, but the previous one where they had participatory communication. Okay, how did they do that? They invited citizens to directly contribute to the election manifesto, and particularly they received so many suggestions across the residents from Delhi covering issues like electricity, education, women's safety. So people basically wrote through emails or letters about the issues which were basically important and what government had to do. So now it was not about government just presenting a manifesto in front of particularly the people, but it is basically how this particularly manifesto came from the people themselves. Okay. Second is dialogue engagement. The party conducted neighborhood level meetings and issue specific consultants, like for example they had meetings with teachers, with rickshawalas, in order to improve electricity and water problems. In terms of education, they had interaction with teachers. Okay. And also the leader of Aam Aadmi Party, which is Arvind Kejriwal, he also responded to citizens' concern publicly. If you remember, he had something called Lok Sabha or Lok Adalats being established in Delhi, particularly in order to listen to the people. Okay. Also, their final manifesto, which is the Swaraj manifesto. Okay. Now, this is the final manifesto which came particularly after having a dialogue or a participation of lot of people around, and the engagement they had with different people from different sectors, whether they were teachers, auto rickshaw walas. So, they had something called Swaraj manifesto coming in, which reflected a Gandhian idea of self-governance. Okay. Now, Gandhian idea of self-governance is basically talking about grassroots level democracy, which is starting from the panchayats or the local level, okay, or from the villages, which basically means that it should be a down or a bottom up approach rather than a top down approach. Okay. So, that is why when we talk about this Swaraj manifesto, which Aam Aadmi Party came, was basically established not on a one-way communication but a two-way communication, which had certain kind of participatory communication from the people itself. Okay. So, yes, it was a bottom up policy document. Okay. Now, the next is how to use media platform effectively. Now, we have already studied that how agenda setting and media framing is done. It is basically because it's an digital age, political leaders must adapt and navigate through traditional and digital media landscape. Now, it is very important that political leaders shift their focus from how media platforms were previously used before the digitalization came, and how they basically use. So, why do you think that in 2014 Modi's campaign was so famous, that Abki Baar Modi Sarkar became so famous? Because it was for the first time that the media was used in a different tonality, the agenda setting was used in a different tonality. This all things came forward. The PR agencies, even though they were there, but how they were used was very important. Okay. So, traditional media outlets like TV, radios and newspapers, though continue to serve as authoritative sources of information, especially for older demographies. But after the digital platform, especially the social media, you have particularly a opportunity of direct communication and rapid response and personalized outreach. Okay. Leaders can personally now reach to the public. Earlier, it used to happen through TV, radios and newspapers. Okay. Strategic media involves to understand the platform specific norms, leveraging visual and short form content and responding swiftly to misinformation. Okay. At the same time, media engagement must be authentic, as performative or overly managed appearance can erode public trust. Okay. So, one is that you should use strategic media, but you should definitely avoid any form of miscommunication happening, because that would lead to people's trust being eroded. Okay. Now, how this media platform was used, basically, let's take up an example of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan or the Clean India Mission. Now, in this particular, you have TV ads, you have radio jingles, you have social media hashtag like Clean My India. Okay. And you have celebrity endorsements also. I told you in previous lectures also that Amitabh Bachchan was used as an idol, or particularly promoting Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. He was basically, you can say, a mascot of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Okay. There was increased participation and change in hygiene habits, that there was building of shauchalays. Okay. That drive was happening everywhere. There was a passage that you should have particularly a commode system being built, and you even had movies being made on it. Okay. So, that is why when we talk about Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, we saw that it was basically reached people through different modes of usage of media, whether it was through television, newspapers, even slogans, campaigning, hashtags, okay, and even through particular movies, okay. Now the next is how you basically use this media platform during disaster communication when there is a natural disaster which has happened. So in that sense, you can particularly government agencies can use media to broadcast safety measures, what all need to be done, what should be the course of action, how you should basically keep yourself contained from whether it is a pandemic. This was basically done by news channels and social media platforms. It could be like COVID-19, it could be an issue of climate change, that how you should get rainwater harvesting done, how you should establish solar panels on top of your houses or buildings. Now all this was basically trying to be promoted by the government through different media channels, okay, whether it's corporate branding through influencing market or TikTok, okay. Next is building credibility through ethical communication, okay. Now when I talk about building credibility through ethical communication, it is basically talking about that how it's not that your trust is only built on whatever work you do, or how your credibility lies in how much efficiency you have brought in the country. It is also very important that the means adopted to bring about this kind of development, how ethical those are, okay. So it's not about you just present the data that today's GDP is 5.10 or whatever, okay, and on the other hand there are people who are dying of poverty, or there are people who do not have shelter, okay. So then even if you have a higher GDP, it would not matter, because ethically you are not able to secure the basic needs of the people, okay. So credibility is vital currency in political leadership. It is earned through ethical communication. So credibility is important, but which means are you going to adopt to ensure this credibility is basically should be through ethical communication practices that emphasize on honesty and transparencies and accountability. Now if you remember that this whole concept of good governance came in terms of ensuring accessibility, ensuring responsibility, accountability, transparency, all these things came at that time, okay. So leaders must communicate not only the successes but failures as well, especially in times of the crisis, okay. Authenticity demonstrated through consistency between word and action builds a long-term public trust. As I told you, what you say and what you preach, okay, or what you do is basically very, very important. So then it is important that ethical political communication requires a commitment to respect the discourse, avoid any kind of manipulation, and the sensitivity to vulnerable and marginalized groups, okay. The normative dimension of political leadership underscores that how leaders communicate is very important as what they communicate, okay. So again, it's not about what you are communicating, it's about how you are communicating, how basically you are going to present that whether your country was able to deal with COVID-19 or not. If you are just going to present that we were able to solve lot of cases, we did not had so many deaths, we were able to contain COVID-19, whereas on the other hand the reality is totally different in certain circumstances, then it becomes difficult that what you are basically preaching or saying is not very credible. Why? Because one, the reality picture is different. Secondly, if you are basically trying to impart certain kind of information in a way that it would lead particularly not appealing to the people, or you're trying to relate it in the form of, say, you're trying to be a very authoritarian or an autocratic leader. For example, during Sanjay Gandhi time, we saw that all this mass drive there where people were basically were not allowed to have kids, okay. You have certain kind of situations and incidents like that the Nasbandi program which was there at that time went wrongly. So at that time people lost all their trust in particularly the Congress party, as well as during the emergency phase, okay. So again, even if you're trying to bring about a change in the society, but how you're going to bring about is very, very important. You cannot be an autocratic leader and force people people to do things, okay. So it's not your intent, but also how you basically try to improve the society, okay. For example, you can have Tata Group India as one of the very important examples. When the situation, particularly during the 2611 acts, the Tata had consistently communicated openly during both good and challenging times, including when closing down businesses or responding to crises like 2611 Mumbai attacks, okay. Now here was a situation where, you know, there was lot of news particularly which came up that how it's people who were employed there in the hotel itself tried to save lot of people, how they lost their lives, and this kind of credibility. Why do we have so much trust in Tata Group than in any other private organization? Because it has built its communication with the people through ethical communication, particularly because their actions they released transparent press statements, they had treated their employees with dignity, they supported the victims and families without publicizing it through PR agencies, okay. So now because of these actions which they did, now these are basically not everything was done for the media, they did basically support them. We know that during that time there were a lot of employees of the Tata Group who were basically came forward to help, okay. And because of this, the impact was that they earned a long-term trust and respect from the public, the employees and the stakeholders, but a strong reputation as a company that values ethics over short-term profit, okay. So this is very, very important when we particularly talk about that what exactly or how we should basically communicate in order to build certain kind of trust among people, okay. Now the next very important thing is about combating information or misinformation, rather I would say. How do we do that? Now misinformation or disinformation poses a serious challenge to effective political communication, okay. So public education should be such that it should promote digital and media literacy and also can empower citizens to critically assess information sources, okay. Furthermore, leaders must resist the temptation to exploit any misinformation for political gain, as doing so undermines the democratic institutions and erodes the civic trust, okay. Again, the misinformation. For example, during COVID-19, there was this misinformation, if you drink Gomutra, you will probably be cured, okay. Now, this is a misinformation. There were many leaders who were basically promoting this, but then it is not trustworthy information. So, if the political leaders are only coming up and saying all this, then it leads to a certain kind of misinformation and the trust is not built. And of course, it was such a, at that time, the health advisory should have been very clearly instructed to a lot of people. So, these kind of misinformation in certain circumstances leads to certain kind of, the credibility going low or distrust being, implanted between the political leaders and the public, okay. So then we say that misinformation particularly should be definitely avoided while you are communicating, okay. Now, the last thing is adapting through context and feedback. Now, this is basically communication must be adapted and context sensitive. Political messaging that is effective in one cultural or historical context may fail in other. So, again I am saying that your communication should be one context sensitive, know your audience, adaptative, you should continuously adapt to the new form. How we do that? Let's just take an example that a marketing team launches or a campaign using humorous content, okay. Humorous content is basically humor, okay. Initial feedback on the social media and customer surveys show that some jokes are being misinterpreted or are being insensitive. We generally see that sometimes stand-up comedians, we say that they are basically telling jokes, and in the middle of the session, if it's a live recording, there are basically comments happening, or people, or you see the audience that they are not enjoying or they are not liking it. So immediately you will change your tonality, or you will change your joke. So that is basically adapting to the situation, and through this feedback, how you change your communication, okay. Another example is basically of a teacher who is explaining complex maths concept to a class, and in the midway she realizes that the students don't understand. So then what she does is she basically starts asking fewer questions, and then she gauzes how the students are basically able to answer that question. She uses visual aids to clarify clarify the concept, and then probably the student starts to say nod or participate more, then you would probably feel that this particular class is actually being attentive or responsive. Okay, so then you basically adapt immediately to the changing environment. So adaptation through feedback is very important. Okay, the last thing I would say that communication in political leadership is a multi-dimensional challenge that demands strategic planning, ethical commitment and emotional intelligence. Okay, now all these particular skills what we have just discussed today are basically talking about in what circumstances you should change your communication, what your communication should be, what should be the context of your communication, and how you basically according to your audience or according to the context you should which particular skill you should adapt in order to appeal to the masses. Okay, so this was basically just telling you of how communication skills can be improved, and particularly how political communication also skills require certain kind of improvement in your day-to-day lives. Okay, so this class I hope would be beneficial to you in understanding how to improve your communication skills and what communication skills are actually important, whether it is you being a part of an organization or a political party or even being a PM of the country. Okay, so I think this should have been beneficial in understanding communicative skills, and I think that's it for today. Thank you.